Before we begin today's lesson, I want us to start with 2 clear learning objectives. These learning objectives are going to be presented in the form of driving questions. I'm going to throw these up on the screen. You can go ahead and jot them down if you want, so that you know what's going to be driving our lesson. The first question that we're going to be answering is, how does the way people consume information affect us as writers? And the second question is, how do we start writing with a multimodal mindset? Like I said, if you want to jot down these questions, you can go ahead and do that. But then I want you to put them to the side because I don't want you to get too caught up and focused on these questions yet. We'll be coming back to those. What I want us to do first is I want us to look at 2 texts. Now, you'll notice as we look at these 2 texts, there's something that connects them clearly, but you'll notice something glaringly different about these 2 texts. So when we're looking at these texts, we are not going to be analyzing them or diving into them in depth. In fact, we're not even going to be reading the information in these texts. We're just going to be window shopping or glancing at these texts. The first text we are going to be looking at is an article by Emily Chen. It's titled "The Argument for Student Loan and Debt Forgiveness." This was written for the News Record, which is an independently published news source by the students at the University of Cincinnati. We are not going to be reading this text. I want to emphasize that. We are just window shopping and glancing at how Emily Chen presents her argument. The second text is titled the exact same thing as Emily Chen's article, and that's because this is an infographic that was inspired by her article. In fact, I created it based on the information in her article. Again, we are not going to be reading this text. We're just going to be glancing over it. Here's where we're going to start the analysis portion of this. You're going to be answering 2 questions, 2 reflection questions. The first question I want you to be answering is, which of these 2 texts would you rather read? And make sure you describe your answer and explain why you picked that text. And then also you can explain why you didn't pick the other text. The second question you're going to be answering is, which of these texts do you believe the general population would be more inclined to read? And tell me why, and also tell me why they didn't choose the other one. I'm going to post these questions on the screen so you can write them down. You can either answer them digitally or on paper. I'd be willing to bet that you probably chose the infographic over the article. And in fact, as an English instructor, I would have even chosen that infographic over the article. And that's because of the ease and clarity of the information and how it's presented visually, spatially, and linguistically. It did not take much effort for me to understand Emily Chen's article by looking at that infographic. And the reason why you, and the general population would likely be more inclined to picking this infographic is because we are very media driven. We like to consume information visually. This is greatly influenced by advancements in technology and the fact that information is presented to us visually at our fingertips on our devices, on our computers. I can scroll through Facebook or Instagram and take in countless number and amount of information in a much more rapid pace than reading an article. And I don't even realize that I'm taking in this information. You know the saying that a picture is worth 1,000 words? That's very true, and that is why we are drawn to visuals and graphically depicted information over reading articles, because reading articles takes work, whereas by just looking at a picture, I've taken in 1,000 words essentially. So I want us to look at some statistics about Americans and our relationship with written text as well as with media or visual text. So the first thing I want us to look at is a chart that shows how many books Americans read in the last year. And this is looking at the years 1978, 1990, and 2014. So you'll see that on the bar graph, we have 5 categories. You'll notice that one of the categories is 1 to 5 books read. The other is 6 to 10 books. These remain fairly consistent over the years, so we're not going to be diving into them too much. But the 2 things that I want us to really focus on are the number of Americans who did not read a book in that year, and the number of Americans who read 11 or more books in a year. So you'll notice that in 1978, before the invention of the internet and before it was easy to communicate information visually, only 8% of Americans had not read a book in the year. This number increased, it jumped greatly to 23% in 2014. So nearly a quarter of Americans are not reading a book in a given year. And you'll notice, if you want to look at the other chart that I include on this slide, that this number changes depending on factors such as gender, race, and economic status. Then if you look back at the first chart, 11 or more books read by Americans. In the year 1978, 42% of Americans had read 11 or more books in a year, whereas that number drops to 28% in 2014. And so we're seeing that Americans are no longer gathering information through written text as much as we used to. Now you might say, well, it's because of millennials and we are so media driven because of the younger generation is glued to their phones and they're glued to technology. But I want us to look at some more statistics because that's actually not true. The average American spends around 5.4 hours a day using their smartphone. And you might say, well, this number is high because of millennials and younger generations. But in fact, that's not true. While millennials do use their phones 5.7 hours per day, that number doesn't drop drastically for older generations. In fact, baby boomers devote 5 hours of time each day to their smartphones, to their devices. And so all generations now are consuming media through visual formats in their devices. I even wanted to go ahead and include a screenshot of my personal screen time. Now, I am someone who reads regularly and I consume information through written text, but I spend more time consuming information visually, as you can see by my data. I spend an average of close to 4 hours a day consuming media visually, and that adds up to 27 hours and 31 minutes in a week, which 14 hours and 22 minutes of that time is spent on social media. So I am taking in many, many pictures, thousands and thousands of words and information visually and graphically each day. And in a week's time, I'm consuming a countless amount of information that way. And so we have to take these statistics and these facts into account when we start to think about how we are communicating information. We can no longer just be writing articles and essays and presenting information in that way because people, quite frankly, are not going to read it. I would be willing to bet that you as a college student have not read every text assigned by your professor. You probably haven't read every text assigned by me. And that's okay because we have to pick and choose how we consume information in order to meet our lifestyles and our needs. And so as writers, we now have the responsibility that we have to begin approaching writing through a multimodal mindset. And we're going to talk about what multimodal means. I'm probably going to get tripped up on that word because it is a bit of a tongue twister, but let's go ahead and break it down. So a multimodal text is a text that is presented using 2 or more semiotic systems. Now, there are 5 semiotic systems we're going to talk about. The first one is linguistic. This is your traditional written or oral text. These are words, okay? And like I said, they can be presented orally or in writing. Next, we have visual. This is graphics or information that is presented in a visual format. Like we've talked about, media relies heavily on the visual semiotic system. We also have audio. another form that media relies heavily on for communicating. This is what you're hearing through music, sounds, and spoken word. We also have gestural. This is present in this video. As you can see, my facial expressions and my body language are communicating to you. So in fact, this video is a multimodal text. And lastly, we have spatially. This is how information is organized, or objects are organized in space, on paper, or in a video. And so all of these can work together in unison in communicating a clear message. And a multimodal text, like I said, relies on 2 or more semiotic systems in order to convey a message. And so we're going to talk about how can we write then with a multimodal mindset. How can we incorporate this into the writing process? So in the past, when you have been doing brainstorming for a paper, you might have written out an outline where you start out and you say introduction, you might write your thesis statement, and then you have your body paragraph and your main points that you're going to make in your paragraphs for each body paragraph, and then your conclusion and some notes in a written format. But if we start writing with a multimodal mindset, we can start thinking the way that we take in information. And so what we can start doing is we can start planning things out visually and spatially in order to best transfer those into that linguistic semiotic system in that written element. And so I'm not saying that we are abandoning articles or argumentative essays. Instead, we are using multimodal mindsets or multimodal text in order to strengthen our writing. And so, like I said, when you're brainstorming, instead of going straight into written linguistic word, plan out visually, spatially, add images, and then write out quotes and sources that help support those images and build your argument. And then you can actually use your multimodal text that you've created in your drafting process. When you're writing, you can be checking and asking yourself, does this paragraph clearly portray that message that I established in my visual depiction? If not, I might need to add more detail and clarity so that a reader can get that information from my visual, from my multimodal text as easily, and it might take a little bit more work because they're going to have to be reading, as they can in my essay. So now I'm ensuring that I am painting that picture and creating that visual with my words, and it's a good way to check yourself. And so this is also done in the revision process, not just the brainstorming process. If I am not painting that picture and hitting my main points that I hit on my multimodal text, then I need to go rework them in my essay in order to better improve that. Lastly, once you've done this and you've created your essay, you've depicted your information and your argument through your essay, as well as in your multimodal text with clarity and consistency, then you can utilize that multimodal text, that infographic, that presentation in your final presentation of your argument. This can be done in real-world application as well. If you are presenting an idea and trying to get your boss to buy into what you have planned and what you want to do at work, maybe for a next project, you're not going to go and set a 5-paragraph essay on their desk and expect them to read it. They're not going to be interested. Instead, by communicating that information visually and graphically and communicating your goal or your argument visually and spatially using those semiotic systems, as well as linguistically by adding in those key points, you now are presenting an argument in a way that this media-driven person will want to take it in and be more likely to buy into and believe your argument. And so this strengthens your argument, and you still have your article, you still have your essay, you still have your research to back up what you're presenting. So when they come to you, because now they're interested and they start to ask you about that idea, you can dive in deeper and show them your research and show them and strengthen what you're doing. So that's a good way in order to do that. So what I want you to take away from this is I want you to start writing with that multimodal mindset, and I want you to begin diving into text that way. And so how we're going to do that is before your next class, you're going to present the other side of the student loan argument, which would be against forgiving student loans. And you can research by using multimodal text, listen to podcasts, watch presentations, look at infographics. And then I want you and a partner to create a multimodal text that presents that other side of the argument. Then for the long-time goal, we are going to be, in addition to our argumented text, we're going to be creating 2 multimodal text. This can be an infographic or a presentation or another format if you would like. And you're going to be doing one in the pre-writing process, like I discussed earlier, where you plan out your essay in a multimodal text. And then the other one, you're going to go back after you've written your essay, you're going to revise your essay and your multimodal text in order to have a piece that you can utilize in the presentation of your argument.